All right, so we are looking here at some things. I entitled mine "Kata, Krima, and Conquest." We're in the section where through the arc of chapters 5 through 8 has dealt with some things of the Christian living. And of course, I've mentioned that the word clusters, the word groupings and pairings includes in chapter 5 through 8 the introduction of the word live or living or to have life. And so coming out of being justified, we have this section, and we've come through the arc a little bit, the story arc of the struggles that are attendant with that. And we're going to focus in, not entirely, but a portion of this one. Mine is 25 minutes, so we'll move quickly. But we're going to focus in on one word that's found here in verse 1. It's the word kata, krima. And we'll develop that momentarily. Let me give a little background here. It is part of a family. So Tim did the decay family, things with righteousness and justice, and covered that well in the early session. A few of you weren't here in the early session. You were probably, catching up on Z's or whatever. But kata, krima is in the Krin family, in English, K-R-I-N. And in Romans, there are several of those, like krino, the judge, kind of a general word. Krima is the judgment or the verdict. Kata krino is to condemn, the declaration of guilt, and so we stand condemned that way under that declaration. Katakrisis and krites is the judge. This is in that family, kata krima. It is found only 3 times in the book of Romans, here, and it's found twice in chapter 5. And I'm going to suggest, again, covering a lot of material here again today, I'm going to suggest that Paul introduces it in chapter 5, I think it's 16 and 18, and teases it just a little bit, lays out something he's going to develop, and then he nails it here, brings it to a triumphant conclusion. There's no kata krimna in chapter 8. And so we're going to develop that along the way. It's found 3 times in Romans. It's found 3 times in the New Testament. These 3, this is it. And so there's something significant. I don't think it's just he got tired of writing a noon and he decided to write a mu. He's using a different word. There's something going on. So we want to develop that. Before we get there, let me give you a couple things. This is, again, part of the, I'm working through verse 17. And then in a little bit, I think Jeff's got the end of the chapter. So he'll be picking up where I'm leaving off and presenting that. And we're reaching that climax. I mean, I know you sense it, Jeff, and you'll pull that out. Like, God is at work, and the glory that will be revealed and so on in us. We're headed in that direction. I find in this 4 paragraphs, and again, I've marked it this way, there's a major one, ara un, therefore now, is a big marker. So the verses 1 to 4, a legal declaration, and kata krimna is in there. There's therefore now no kata krimna. And we're going to develop the meaning of that a little more refined than just condemnation. 5 through 8, there's a gar that marks it, and it's going to be an explanation. And 9 to 11, a de, and 12 to 17. Let me take this same basic screen, but put it into the indentations and show you how I am looking at it. And again, this is that block diagramming laid out on a passage level, not just internally, but a passage level. And there are 2 question marks. This is the way I've done it. So here's the main thesis here, verses 1 to 4. There's a declaration, a statement. There is no kata krima. This is going to be your main thought. It'll be developed in verses 1 to 4. And then I find support here, the 4, and I think it's a de in verse 9, that further support it. It's going to take that idea, there's no condemnation. Let me give you the basis for it in 5 to 8. Let me give you a little bit more. I've made these parallel. You might in your thinking find the gar in 5 to be subordinate and explaining verses 1 to 4, and then you might come over here with verses 9 to 12. The one other one, just markers, this is the way I'm looking at it. I am interested in verses 12 to 17, there's another big paragraph here because it also has an ara un. So these are 2 separate paragraphs. Let me jump into verses 1 to 4. I'm going to do the same thing, but move 1 layer zoomed in. All right, does that make sense? If I can get off my screen, there we go. And so now we have verses 1 to 4. So I'm developing 1 to 4. We have the main thesis of this paragraph. This is a small paragraph of 4 verses. Here is the main thesis. There's therefore now no kata krimna. And then he's going to develop that. And it is in Christ Jesus. And in some of you have King James, New King James. And there's a phrase, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. I'll mention that in passing in a moment. And then we have a statement that supports that. How is it? What's involved with this no condemnation or this no kata krimna? And I've summarized the verse 2. We've been freed because of the law of the Spirit. And so that's the support. I take the next one step in. What about this law of the Spirit? Well, it's because God acted in Christ. And you might slightly change which one is subordinate, so but same vein. You're in the general pattern. We're thinking the same thing. And then this is the one that might be different here. Number 4, verse number 4. The law requirement is fulfilled in those who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Because of the importance of the argument that I'm developing, I have brought it out here pretty close to the main thesis. So that's how my mind is organizing this passage. And so we want to do that. I want to move, basically the general thesis is we notice in these 4 verses, which Paul's going to then file in the paragraphs, developing it further and into the implications and so on. But in verses 1 to 4 of chapter 8, it essentially mirrors chapter 7. And Lawrence covered quite a bit of that yesterday. In chapter 7, we have Paul's struggle. And I know among the literature there is questions, is this Paul struggling before salvation versus victory after, or what? I know for me, and Lawrence indicated for him, we're seeing that's something that's going on with Paul, that as a saved man, he is struggling. And one of the big things that's going to happen in this section, in verses 1 to 4 of chapter 8, is, you remember he closed chapter 7 with this, I am struggling, the things I want to do, I don't do. And the exact things that I shouldn't do, guess what? I struggle, that's what I do. And then he closes, who will deliver me from this terrible thing? And he closes the word with Jesus Christ. The answer is in Jesus Christ. We flow right into where we are this morning. And the answer is that it has to do with our relationship with Jesus Christ. And the wording that's going to be introduced here, and we'll develop it here in this section, again, in this brief time, the element that is added that is not found in chapter 7 is the Spirit. His position in Christ has already been established, but when he tries to do it by the power of the law or in the power of the flesh and himself, it does not work, and he struggles. And what's introduced here is there is victory. That's where we're headed, all the way into Jeff's session on the glory that's coming and so on. There is victory, and the change is not only knowing that we're in Christ, that's here, but it is that there is the Spirit of God and an attitude of following the Spirit of God. And so allow me to develop that. This brings us into the centerpiece of our lesson here on this word, kata krima. I mentioned it's found 3 times. ESV is translated condemnation. It's probably something like what you have. That's not a wrong definition. I put up here the information from BDAG. And what I'm interested in is this. It is a little bit different than just the verdict. And so with kata krino or with krinao, it would be the verdict is read. The judge, if you again picture the courtroom scene that is underlying a portion of Romans, with krino or kata krino, God the judge has looked at you and has looked at me, and he has lowered the gavel and said, I declare that you're guilty. In justification, chapters 3 and 4, by faith alone, the judge now looks at us and says, I see you in Christ. It comes down and it says, not guilty. The verdict is reversed and you stand acquitted before the Lord. What we're getting at here in kata krima is one step further. We have the verdict read, the krino, kata krino idea. what we're looking at is kata krima. It is the sentence applied. And so we have that here, that kata krima it follows the condemnation, but it's not just a pronouncement of the verdict. This is just reading what you see on the screen. It's the adjudication. It is the actual sentencing. It is the application of the punishment. It is the penalty being acted upon. And where I'm headed in short is this word seems to relate. It ties together, I'll call them loose ends for this discussion, but it ties together the loose ends, the activities, as it were, of chapters 5 through 8. So in chapter 5, we were teased, we were introduced to kata krima. We are not only condemned, we not only had the verdict, you are guilty, but we are under that sentence in action. We are under kata krima. In Adam, we face the consequences and the actions that flow from that. That's kata krima. We are under that condemnation, or we're under kata krima. And that the things that are developed in 5, 6, 7, and 5, 6, and 7 chapters that involve the struggles of walking in the flesh, that involve slavery and bondage. This is part of the application of kata krima. The net results or the effects of kata krima are that in Adam we were enslaved to sin. And so there's kind of two things. We're guilty legally before God. Because of that, we are under that sentence. That sentence is applied. And the effects of that sentence are that we're in slavery, we're in bondage to sin. We struggle in the flesh. We have all these different things. And where we're headed, what we're trying to cover in the big picture is not in justification. The verdict is reversed. We're no longer guilty under God the judge, but there's still something to deal with, and that is the effects in our lives. And this is a pretty rough and ready analogy, but if it helps you to begin thinking about it, it would be this. The verdict issue, the kata krino, is in the courtroom when the judge hits the gavel and says, you are guilty. And of course, justification would be the reversal of that. The kata krima that we're discussing here in chapter 8 is more like the sentence is read, you're going to serve time in jail. You got hard time coming. And so it is in the jail. And the implications, the effects of that sentence are, we're in jail, we're in slavery, we're in bondage, and so on. That's covered in chapters 5 and 6 and 7. And in this statement in chapter 8, verse 1, that we're no longer under kata krima because of our relationship to Christ, this is an indication not only of the reversal of the legal forensic standing, but now the living out. And this ties together a lot of loose ends because in Romans 7, Paul is struggling with that. He says, I want to serve God, but I can't. I don't want to do things that are wrong, but I do. Who will deliver me from this body of death? And the answer is in Christ, and that's when we turn the page to chapter 8. There is no kata krima because the Spirit has entered the picture, and so on. Let me develop it a step further here. The idea would be this, that kata krima is the penal sentence that flows from condemnation. It's not merely the declaration of guilt. In Adam, that kata krima, that condemnation sentence, the penal penalty, is that death reigns and that sin is the master. That's the effect of it. In Christ, with justification, we now have the reversal of the verdict, and we have the opening of the jail door that now would allow not to live under the bondage. And so we kind of see these things. Kata krima is the sentence, and the reign of sin, the bondage of death, is the condition produced by kata krima. And so I'm challenging you to think on this. One of the way of wording it would be this: the condemnation sentence, the kata krima, that was imposed through Adam, resulted in humanity living under the power of sin and death. And Romans 8:1 declares that those in Christ are no longer under that sentence. And so that's what we're developing here. This is part of victorious Christian living. And even our title for the whole thing, Romans, Justified Living, we're covering that you need to be justified. You have to be justified. But out of that, there's a way to live that pleases God. That's what we're trying to develop. Let me take it a step further here and notice a couple things in the text here. And so this is just kind of observations that I think are very practical and very key. We have two competing things going on here in this section. This is up through verse 17. It keeps going in the rest of the chapter, but in verses 1 through 17, we have the preposition, two prepositions. The first one is en, or in, and it's found 14 times. Not everyone is pertinent to our discussion, but it's found a lot. It's a common preposition. And then the preposition kata, or kata, according to. Both of the en really is the one I'm looking at first. The en is, just by its nature, the preposition describes position. And depending on what you're describing and what your context is, it could be spatial position. I think Howard and Alan both covered some of these. It could be spatial, it could be in time, it could be in sphere, it could be, there's several things, but it's in. And literally, for us Browns, probably for many of you, we use the term positional truth for a lot of reasons, but part of it is rooted in the fact that en, as a preposition, indicates position. If you're in something, you're positionally there. Yeah, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, John? Yeah, it kind of flows. And so we're dealing here with position. And what we see throughout the Pauline literature, what we see in Romans, and what we see here in chapter 8 is that there are those who are in Christ, and that is their position. In other words, that's their legal standing. That is their standing, their status before God. This relates to justification. To be justified by faith before God in His sight is to be in Christ. That is our position. And there are a lot of attendant things that we're not covering today from other passages of what it means to be in Christ. But this is part of the language that I use. I know Lawrence, same kind of thing, and the others, that we talk about positional truth. We're in Christ. And deals with our reality. This is fixed. This is legal. The other one we're going to encounter here is the kata, or the kata, that's found 6 times. Standard preposition, often translated according to. And in practical terms here, we're going to see that this is going to indicate not our legal standing, but our experience. That we're oriented towards something. We're aligned with it. The harmonics are aligned. We resonate with something. And the two choices, as we'll see in just a moment, are going to be whether we're aligned with the flesh, whether we're walking, living, functioning in accordance with fleshly things, or whether we're aligned, walking with, in accordance with spiritual things. And I'm going to actually back up because I'd forgotten one comment. One of the things that's going on here is, and it's in verses 1 to 4, is the requirements here. So what I'm suggesting is there's no kata krimna, and there certainly is in the text for those who are in Christ Jesus. So there is a positional aspect. One of the ones, and I'm not going to answer because I know there's different viewpoints on the textual criticism. There is a textual variant depending on what text you're following. In verse number 1, to those who don't walk after the flesh but after the Spirit. I'm not going to answer that question. I'm suspicious it might be there, but irregardless, the argument does not change the rest of this section all the way through verse 12, 13. And no kata krimma in verse 4, it is explicit. It is not a textual issue. Those who are in Christ Jesus, and again the question, walking flesh or spirit. But in verse 4, to conclude the full thought that Paul's developing, he says, the law's requirement is fulfilled in those who walk according to the Spirit. And so to put it in plain terms, my time is limited, is the in Christ position, the legal standing is not a question. That is not only assumed, it's stated. Here is that the kata krimna, in effect, in action, is dependent on walking according to the Spirit and not according to the flesh. Allow me to move forward here, and you can ponder this a little bit and develop this. What I'm saying is there's something bigger, or there's something more actionable than only, as important as it is to be justified, to have the verdict reversed. There is still the effects of the verdict. And this would tie into issues with the body that's actually in here. The flesh issues of the weakness, in my flesh dwells no good thing kind of idea. This will tie into, and I imagine many of us, most of us are probably on the same general page, but a two nature, when we're saved, a two nature issue. I know there are a few in conservative circles that would advocate when we're born again, the old nature is actually removed or eradicated. I'm going to guess. That is not my position. I think there's something going on. How to word it exactly, not positive. But there's an old nature that is still able, though positionally crucified, it still needs to be put to death daily. And whenever we live out of that, and the phrasing here would be whenever we walk according to flesh, we get fleshly results. It never works. It can never produce good things. If we walk according to the flesh, we can never please God. It's just by nature, definitionally, that's how it works. The flip side of that coin is for those who are in Christ, when we walk according to the Spirit, when we're in alignment with the Spirit of God and His Word, that always produces that which is good. And so the growth area, the battle is not only in chapter 7, I want to do this and I don't want to do that and I do. The answer comes into how we approach our life, our walk, and aligning our lives with the Spirit of God. So let me take it a step further. We looked at that. And what we end up with this is my kind of conclusion of this is believers are in Christ. A little later in the passage, they are in the Spirit, and the Spirit is in them. By the way, those would be biblical definitions of what it is to be a believer. The hard part, of course, is I can't look at Isaiah and say, "Oh yeah, I see the Spirit there. You know, he must be saved." We measure different ways by our words and our actions and so on. But this is the biblical definition: in Christ, in Spirit, and the Spirit in them. Those are biblical definitions out of this passage of a believer. And here's where I'm headed. This ties in with our whole arc of sanctification ideas. In Christ believers, those believers, by definition, a believer is in Christ. Believers, that is people who are in Christ, they do sometimes. They are able, unfortunately, from our perspective, to walk according to the flesh. Let me show you this chart, and this kind of puts it together here real quickly. The N, if we're in flesh, that means we're unsaved. That is a definition of unsaved. To have the position of being in the flesh is to be none of Christ. It is to be apart from the Spirit. In flesh, as a position, is Paul's way in this passage saying you're unsaved. Those who are in flesh, can they walk according to the flesh? Yes, indeed they must. That is their only option. And that's why I put the red forbidden sign or whatever. They are not able to walk according to the Spirit. They're not in harmonics with Him. They don't understand the things of the Spirit. But the text is pretty clear here that those who are in the Spirit, that is, they're in Christ, that is, they're saved, they now face a challenge that if they walk, when they walk according to the flesh, there is failure in Christian living, in pleasing the Lord and so on. When they walk according to the Spirit, there is life and peace and growth. All right, and that's how this works. The trick, the mechanism, and some of this maybe is irreducible to human terms, but the trick of sanctification is learning to listen to the Spirit, understanding the Bible and applying it. And the phrase is walking in step with the Spirit of God. Let me give you one more thing here, and I think this is my last screen, and it is. he goes on from verse 12 and following, and he reads there another big araun, a big thing. So then, brothers, we are debtors, not to the flesh. And the unfortunate thing is we still sometimes get back to paying the flesh. Not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. If you do that, if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. And he goes on from there and mentions the thing that we are not only children, more than that, we are heirs. Heirs if we suffer with him. And it'll lead into your session, Jeff, very quickly. It flows into future glory and victory and the final full conquest that is ours in practical terms. And so some things to think about. Ties together some loose ends. Your work would be on a couple of these things, if you want to pursue it, is checking out cata, cryma. It's found those 3 times. It's a little different. It's not quite the same thing as the verdict. It's the sentencing. It is the application of that, and therefore things flow out of that. And then seeing what's going on with flesh and spirit, what it means in practice. As we preach, you can't just say, walk in the Spirit. Your question would be, what do you mean? How do I do that? And so we need to develop that more in practical terms. And so there's quite a bit there to think about, but I found this was one of my favorite parts of studying this, is putting together some of this stuff. Normally I try and reserve time for questions, but I ran out of time. So I told Lawrence I would stir the pot, and then he could clean it up and everything. So we'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes. Why don't we do 4, and then Lawrence is up and continuing our discussions of things with Christian living on the mind. Thank you for your attention.